Kevin Delaney here, coming out live and direct at you. I want to share a few thoughts with you about thinking, and specifically thinking outside the box. We've all heard that term, think outside the box. And I want to share a few thoughts with you about what I think it means and how to not only think outside the box, but also live outside the box. Because, it's one thing to think outside the box, but if on a regular basis you're living outside the box, well, then in a sense you don't have to specifically work to think outside the box because you're already outside the box. Your mind is working in such a way that it's kind of always outside the box. Quentin Crisp, I guess you'd call him a humorist, the British writer and raconteur, he was gay, and he was very openly gay in even the 1930s. And people would ask him, they said, well, when did you come out? Or how did you come out? And his response was always, I was never in. And, there's a kind of a correlation here. If you're never inside the box, then almost by definition, everything you think, everything you do is going to be at least a little bit outside the box. So what is the box? Well, the box is basically the comfort zone. And it can be the comfort zone for an individual person. It can be the comfort zone for a culture or a society. The box is basically the comfort zone / the safety zone. That's where most people stay. And, the box represents the conventional way of thinking, the normal, typical way of approaching a subject, let's say. And the person who thinks outside the box is willing to question and challenge that perspective. So there's if you imagine a box, like a frame around something. And the really first-handed kind of thinker is able to look at that box and say, well, why do the boundaries have to be here? What if they were extended a little bit more? Or what if this was not the way that people are assuming that it is? Or what if it doesn't have to be the way people are assuming it has to be? Questioning, challenging, willing to take a step in a slightly different direction. Taking 2 steps to the left or 2 steps to the right. People say something is not possible. This can't be done. And again, it's that first-handed kind of really creative mind that says, I don't know about that. Well, let's try it. Let's try it and see. After all, what have we got to lose? All right. But one thing you have to understand about the box, and the reason why more people don't think outside the box, is because a lot of people associate the box with safety, with security. The box can be very cozy. Here in LA, there's a definite type of person that you encounter pretty often. And this is the person who, for lack of a better way of describing it, it's as though everything about them, all their likes, all their values, are dictated to them not just by society, but specifically by current pop culture. There are people who, it's like their whole life is just completely dominated by thoughts about, the current hot movies and the current hot TV shows and the current hot pop music. And that is at least their aesthetic world. And if there's a restaurant, for example, that's really trendy, that's actually a key word for this type of person, trendy. If anything is currently trendy, they're on it, right? They follow trends. They follow the fads. It's almost like they wouldn't be caught dead wearing something that wasn't in right now, that wasn't in fashion. There are a lot of people, and men and women. Men and women have this kind of affliction, where it's like their whole life is dictated to them by the media, by magazines and whatever is currently popular and hot. And of course, this is a constant cycle, so that things are really hot and in today, and tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, they're out, which means that in effect, these people are no longer allowed to like what they liked last week, last month, last year. So it's like this constant updating. They have to constantly change, their interests and whatnot. They can't be interested in that music group or that artist or whatever because they were hot like 2 years ago and they're not hot anymore. So you got to be interested now in the news. And of course, it goes without saying that this whole mindset and mentality is absolutely promulgated and promoted to get you to buy stuff. You notice that when you do this, you just got to keep buying and buying and buying and buying stuff. You can't say, okay, I think I'm good. I don't think I need any more, music, or I think the clothes I have are perfectly fine. They're not worn out or anything. No, you got to get rid of the wardrobe because it's out of style. It's not hot anymore. It's not trendy. And there are people who will buy a pair of shoes for an exorbitant amount of money, wear them for some brief period of time, and then it's like they can't wear the shoes anymore. They'll even say, like, I wouldn't be caught dead wearing those shoes now. Again, because it's not hot, it's not in, it's not trendy. And needless to say, again, these are people who are just, their minds are programmed by outside forces. And what I'm talking about here is truly, as I've said, being that first-hand creative mind. Now, what does first-hand means? It means your thoughts begin with you. What do I think? How do I see it? What makes sense to me? What matters to me? What's important to me? As opposed to what's the crowd doing? What's the gang doing? What's everybody else doing? You don't have to look to a magazine or to an entertainment TV show to tell you what's good. You decide that for yourself. And the thing is, too, the kind of person I'm talking about here is oftentimes very, very, very limited in terms of what they can even just be exposed to. Oftentimes if you mention some obscure kind of thing, they just look at you like, what? Like, why would I care about that? It's not hot. It's not in. And not that they say that, but it's kind of what it amounts to. And again, a lot of people, I think they fear the responsibility of having to make decisions for themselves. I think they like being part of a group. They like being part of a larger, kind of movement or gang or whatever it might be. And that's a very important point, too, when we talk about thinking outside the box. The willingness to stand alone, the willingness to be alone, the willingness to, if necessary, not just walk a path that not a lot of other people are walking, not just be a member of a smaller group that's doing something different from what the big group is doing, but truly at times, if and when necessary, to walk truly alone and forge your own path. And again, constantly asking, what do I think? How do I see it? What matters to me? What's important to me? What do I care about? And needless to say, this is going to make you, by definition, practically an outsider. And you have to be prepared for that. You have to be willing to be that kind of person. You have to be willing to stand on your own 2 feet, and even if other people think you're crazy, think that you're weird, and they will, and one thing's for sure, you will not be cool. Oh no, you will not. You might become cool later on once your ideas catch on, but for the time being, you're just like a weirdo, because you're not doing what everybody else is doing, and you don't think the way everybody else thinks. But thinking outside the box, and again, living outside the box, is, in a lot of ways, that sums up my whole philosophy of life. I say 3 words to live and think by: outside the box. This is one thing I've been getting lately into Neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, which is a very interesting field, and there's a ton of books on the subject, and some of them are better than others. But one thing I have to say I really like about NLP is it definitely has this kind of renegade, outside the box, um, almost there's an irreverent spirit to it. In the introduction to, I think it was Bandler and Grinder's first book from 1975. I think it was Virginia Satir wrote the introduction, and she said, I love these guys. They believe in nothing, and they will use anything." So, in other words, and in fact, I have heard Richard Bandler say that he came up with the term neuro-linguistic programming in large part because he wanted to have some kind of name for his field that didn't tie him to any established school, so to speak, of psychology. So he could basically do whatever, or any other previously established science, really. He could do whatever he wanted. And that's really kind of the spirit of it, is, you know, trying different things, seeing what works. Um, and there's very much of an outside the box kind of attitude. Here's a good example. Um, if somebody, let's say, is experiencing anxiety, or really any kind of unpleasant or painful emotion, let's say, if that person went to a traditional type of therapist, oftentimes the therapist will say, "Well, tell me about this. Tell me about how you're feeling," and you know, therapists then will, well, let's get into the roots of this, and let's get into your childhood, and let's see. Really, they won't say this exactly, but who was responsible for this? Like, what events in your past have led to this today? And hopefully over the next few months, if not even years, we can work through all this anxiety and whatnot. And I don't want to knock that method entirely, but an NLP practitioner, if you go to them and you say, I'm experiencing anxiety right now," very often one of the first things they'll ask you is, "What color is it?" And the person goes, "What? Yeah, what color is it? What color is the anxiety?" And the interesting thing I've found is a lot of the time when you ask somebody that question, you can actually ask that about any emotion. Very often the person will say, "It's kind of bluish gray." And then oftentimes too, again, the NLP practitioner will ask, "Where do you feel it?" So if somebody says they're feeling anxiety, that's another question. Where do you feel it? Where in your body do you feel it? And again, people say different things. They might say, "I feel it in the pit of my stomach," mostly. "I feel it in my chest. I feel it all up around my shoulders and the back of my neck." Or sometimes too, it moves, like it begins in my stomach, and it's like it moves up into my chest. Another question they often ask is, which direction is it spinning? Now, I have to confess, these questions don't really do it for me. I have so often asked myself these questions about emotions that I'm feeling, and I couldn't tell you. I can't tell you what color it is, or which way it's spinning. Now, in some cases, I might be able to tell you what part of my body I feel it in. But a lot of people, apparently, if you ask them, uh, you know, what color is it? Where do you feel it in your body? And then, especially like with anxiety, which direction is it spinning? Is it spinning one direction, like clockwise or counterclockwise? The interesting thing is, these questions have very real specific purpose. There's a very specific reason why they'll ask these questions. But one of the great benefits of these questions is they kind of shock the person out of their rut a little bit, just a little bit. And I've said this before. Oftentimes, a person who is depressed, a person who's experiencing depression, is a person who is, in a lot of ways, they're stuck in a rut, right? Their thought patterns are they're very repetitive oftentimes. People who are depressed say things to themselves, and they tend to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. One thing is, "I'm so depressed," or again, my life is awful," or "It's no use. What's the use? Why bother? Everything sucks. Everything's terrible." And The part of the goal here is to kind of shock them out of that rut. You're kind of actually knocking them off the road a little bit, and that can be very beneficial because it gets them thinking in a new direction. If you ask the person, who's just so focused on this anxiety, I'm feeling this anxiety, I feel it, and then you ask, what color is it? Now all of a sudden you're asking them to consider the anxiety from an entirely different standpoint. In a sense, you're asking them not to feel it, but to see it for a moment. Instead of feeling this anxiety, what if you saw the anxiety? What does it look like? What color is it, etc. And this alone can be such a beneficial way of thinking. I find so often, when somebody is having troubles of any kind, oftentimes, usually if somebody's coming to you for help, somebody's coming to you for advice, somebody's coming to you, because they're, experiencing some emotional issues in their life, oftentimes they've already talked to themselves a lot. So they've said a lot to themselves, and very often what they've said is very repetitive. So they've kind of been saying a lot of the same things over and over and over and over and over and over and over in their mind. And oftentimes, as a therapist or as a teacher or as a friend, one of the best things you can do is to interrupt those thoughts. They've been having them, for the past, it might even be years, the same old dialogue over and over and over in their mind. What if you could, so to speak, pull the needle off the record real fast and just interrupt that dialogue? Say something or ask them something that they hadn't even considered. Now, even if the person says, what color is it? I don't know. I don't really experience it as a color. Nonetheless, you got them for a second to look at it from a different angle. Even if they can't answer it, you still knock them off the path. And very often, again, that is beneficial insofar as it helps people to see there's more than just one perspective here. That's what everybody who is suffering really needs. Oftentimes, people get so locked into that one viewpoint, that one way of seeing things. And oftentimes, like I said, the best thing that you can show them or offer them is not even any specific advice, but just the idea that there are other options. There are other possibilities. There are other angles that you can consider this issue from that you may not have considered. So that's what I think. There's just a few thoughts there. I'll probably do more about this. In fact, I'd actually love to do something a lot more extensive about this, because this really has to do with a basic orientation toward life, a way of life, not just a way of thinking, but a way of living and a way of conducting yourself on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute-to-minute basis. So those are just some thoughts. You can leave a comment. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you later.